Have you ever been dismissed or pushed aside? So has Linda. But she didn't just get back up, she took back control. Her journey from being sidelined to becoming a resilient leader, restoring and growing the company through sheer patience, truth, and confidence, is proof of just how powerful quiet strength can be. Sometimes, winning isn't about defeating others, it's about conquering yourself. Follow this inspiring story and remember, no matter where you are in life, you have the power to change your fate. Linda, 48, was a grounded and sharp-witted woman with more than 20 years of experience in finance at a major tech company in New York. She wasn't one to boast about her achievements. Everyone in the company knew her as a reliable financial expert, someone people turned to when things got complicated. But there was something no one knew. Linda wasn't just an employee. She was also the second-largest shareholder in the company, holding more than 30% of its equity. Everything began to shift when Jason, a young and ambitious new CEO, joined the company. He quickly started reshaping the organizational structure, moves that left many longtime employees feeling overlooked. Then one morning, Linda received a notice. Her salary would be cut by 20%. When she stepped into Jason's office, he couldn't hide the smug satisfaction on his face as he watched one of the company's most senior employees confront this change. "Linda," he said confidently, "I'll admit, you're a dedicated employee. But you have to understand, this industry moves fast. And you haven't exactly kept up with the latest trends. We need innovation, and that means cutting costs. Your salary will be reduced by 20%. Her heart sank. She had sacrificed so much, missed family time, skipped vacations, poured herself into this job. And now it was being dismissed as not innovative enough. What hurt more than the pay cut was the way he looked at her, like everything she'd given to the company for the past 20 years didn't matter. She couldn't let this slide. What Jason didn't know was that the woman he saw as outdated had quietly managed the company's finances for years. And now, instead of walking away, Linda made a choice. She would use the quiet power she held to make him pay. After Jason's decision to cut her pay, Linda felt her patience had finally run out. This wasn't just a professional insult, it was personal. Her contributions over 2 decades had been brushed aside as irrelevant. Still, she didn't react immediately. She knew that in this environment, emotional outbursts only made things worse. She had once been one of the most influential figures in the company. Now she'd been pushed to the sidelines. If she was going to fight back, she needed strategy, not impulsiveness. She began gathering information, quietly observing Jason's decisions. And what she found was alarming. Under Jason's leadership, the company was heading into a financial mess. He kept making poor budget decisions, slashing costs recklessly, and pouring funds into risky projects with no clear strategy. Shareholders were starting to worry, and the cracks in the financial reports were growing harder to ignore. Linda realized she could use this. With her deep knowledge of the company's finances, she knew exactly which investments were bleeding money and where Jason's strategies were weakest. But she also knew she couldn't go after him openly. Not yet. Instead, she would stay silent a little longer, gather the evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The big question. Could she use the hidden power she still held to turn things around? Could she make Jason realize just how wrong he'd been to underestimate her? Linda started mapping out a plan. Not the kind born of vengeance, but a calculated, airtight move that left no trace of personal motive. She knew Jason was steering the company toward a liquidity crisis, and if she acted at just the right moment, with the right proof, she could force the board to reconsider his role. But Linda wanted more than just to see him fall. She wanted her name restored. She wanted to prove that experience and resilience don't age, and that the woman dismissed today could be the one controlling the company tomorrow. A few weeks later, in an internal meeting, Jason proudly announced a nearly $10 million investment in a startup that hadn't even been properly audited. Linda sat quietly in the corner, but inside, she was on fire. She had already reviewed that startup's financials, and she knew one more reckless move like this, and the company could collapse within a year. Time was running out. Linda began quietly rallying the senior shareholders she trusted. Using her knowledge, she laid out the real financial picture, no fluff, no illusions. She began asking pointed questions in board meetings, questions Jason couldn't answer. A wave of doubt started to ripple through the ranks. What if the woman labeled out of touch was actually the one who understood the company best and held the real power? Would Linda reveal herself as the second largest shareholder? Or would she stay in the shadows until the final moment, when she could pull back the curtain and flip the whole game? She knew her moment had come. The hallway whispers. The side glances in the boardroom. The growing discomfort among senior shareholders as losses piled up. Jason no longer had their full support. Linda didn't need a direct confrontation. She needed a strategic blow. She started by using the very system she had built years ago as CFO. Though she had stepped into a part-time advisory role to spend more time with her family, she still had access to senior financial data and, crucially, the authority to freeze investment flows if systemic risk was detected. Linda drafted an internal report detailing misaligned cash flows, risky investment patterns, and, most importantly, a potential conflict of interest involving Jason's latest startup deal. She quietly contacted a legal team she trusted in Chicago. They investigated the startup's ownership and discovered that Jason had indirect ties through a relative on the executive board. If exposed, the deal could trigger an SEC investigation. Step by step, Linda began sending the report to other major shareholders, none of whom knew she was the second largest stakeholder. Meanwhile, she kept showing up, still the calm, quiet presence in the room. In the office, she looked like a middle-aged woman quietly trying to adapt to the digital age, underestimated, overlooked, but watching Jason's every move like a seasoned chess player. Linda also quietly reached out to Charles Granger, the chairman of the board, a man she had worked with in the early days of the company. Over a lunch meeting in Midtown Manhattan, she presented a report backed by irrefutable logic. Charles was stunned when he saw her signature on the equity ownership documents. "Linda, I had no idea you held that much stock," he exclaimed. She simply smiled. "I never needed to make my ownership public. But now it's time to protect the company. And I need your support." She was no longer the underestimated woman sitting quietly in the boardroom. Linda had begun to act not out of revenge for her pay cut, but to bring the truth to light and save the company from an incompetent CEO who was destroying everything. Linda thought that once the evidence was laid out clearly, shareholders would quickly demand Jason's resignation. But instead, the board's initial reaction wasn't action, it was doubt. Jason, with his usual confident swagger and mastery of internal media spin, quickly retaliated. He called an emergency shareholders meeting and publicly denounced those stuck in the past who don't understand technology but want to stand in the way of innovation. He didn't name names, but everyone knew he was talking about Linda. Some younger shareholders, those enthralled by Jason's promise to turn the company into the next tech unicorn, began to question Linda. Her detailed financial report was dismissed as outdated and disconnected from high-growth market dynamics. Worse still, Jason found out Linda had privately met with Charles Granger and immediately ordered the internal audit team to review her data access. In a move laced with intimidation, she was temporarily locked out of the accounting system under the pretense of maintaining data security. Linda understood this was his counterattack. And if she didn't make her next move, Jason would find a way to fully discredit her. But Linda wasn't someone who could be easily cornered. She had been through the early startup days in a rented Brooklyn office and had weathered the 2008 market crash. Jason might manipulate the narrative in the short term, but he couldn't change the facts. However, this wasn't just a financial battle. It was a psychological one. Linda felt exhausted, physically and mentally. She began to doubt herself. Am I going too far? Should I back off and just let this go? That was when others who had been hurt by Jason began to reach out. A former manager from the analytics department, pushed out after opposing Jason's risky investment policies, contacted her. A legal department staffer secretly sent her a copy of internal documents exposing Jason's contract manipulation. Linda realized, even if she was under fire, she wasn't alone. And if Jason thought he had won just because she remained silent, then he had seriously misjudged the woman he once called naive. Linda knew that if she wanted to take back control of the company, not just financially, but in spirit, she needed to deliver a decisive blow. And this time, she wouldn't stay in the shadows. 3 weeks later, a surprise announcement went out to all shareholders. An emergency shareholders meeting would be held at company headquarters in Manhattan, called by the second largest shareholder, Linda Whitmore, in accordance with the company charter. It was the first time her name was publicly tied to a major shareholder role. The news spread quickly. Jason turned pale when he received the notice, realizing he had completely underestimated the woman he once dismissed as just a part-time accountant. At the meeting, Linda took the stage. She was no longer the quiet, middle-aged woman sitting in the corner. That day, she wore a navy blue suit, stood tall, and carried a thick folder filled with financial evidence, findings from an independent legal review, and statements from former employees. She presented her case clearly, not bitterly, not vindicatively, but with data, calm conviction, and the credibility she had built over 2 decades. Mr. Jason engaged in unauthorized high-risk investments, deliberately failed to disclose conflicts of interest, and has placed the company at risk of insolvency within the next 18 months. I call for a vote of no confidence in the CEO and propose the formation of an independent internal investigation committee. The room went silent. Then Charles Granger spoke. We've been blinded by promises of growth and forgotten the principles of sustainability. Linda, thank you for reminding us. The vote happened immediately. 58% of shareholders voted to suspend Jason pending the outcome of the investigation. This wasn't just a personal victory for Linda. It was a dramatic turning of the tide, a moment when the woman once dismissed had exposed the truth and pulled the company back from the brink. But Linda knew this was only the turning point. The bigger battle, rebuilding the company and redefining the true meaning of leadership, was just beginning. 2 months after that dramatic vote, the atmosphere at company headquarters in Manhattan had completely changed. Gone were the hollow tech slogans plastered across the hallways. Gone were the meetings overloaded with flashy PowerPoint slides, but devoid of real substance. In their place was a renewed sense of clarity, caution, and a return to core values. Linda never took the CEO position. She knew she didn't need the title to wield power. With rising trust from shareholders and the support of veteran staff, Linda was appointed interim chair of the board, tasked with overseeing the financial restructuring and hiring a new executive team. It was the first time in her career that Linda held the highest role, not for glory, but for responsibility and vision. She began by reinstating employees who had been pushed out under Jason, those with real expertise who had been dismissed for not fitting the fast-paced startup culture. She required the entire management team to disclose all salaries, bonuses, and financial benefits, something Jason had consistently avoided. Another critical step, Linda brought in an independent auditing firm to reassess the entire investment portfolio. As a result, she boldly cut off long-term underperforming assets and reinvested in the company's core products, the very ones that had made its name 15 years ago. She wasn't chasing quick profits. She was building long-term sustainability. From internal communications to decision-making structures, everything began to shift. Employees started to feel that their voices actually mattered. An internal survey showed that 82% of staff believed the company was moving in the right direction, the highest number in 5 years. Linda also launched a new leadership development program specifically for women, not just to inspire, but to create real opportunities. I stayed silent for a long time because I thought I was too old, that I couldn't keep up with technology, Linda said at the program's launch. But the truth is, experience, integrity, and patience never go out of style. From someone whose pay was cut for being seen as uninformed, Linda had become a symbol of renewal, resilience, and quiet intelligence. She didn't need to shout or threaten. Her power came from listening, analyzing, and acting at the right moment. Linda's transformation didn't just shake up the company, it rippled across the entire industry. The Wall Street Journal quickly ran a headline. "The woman called uninformed who saved her company from the brink." Financial outlets like Bloomberg, Forbes, and Fast Company all ran features analyzing the Linda Whitmore case as a textbook example of how age and gender bias can lead to a gross misjudgment of leadership potential. In the investment world, Linda's credibility skyrocketed. The New York Teachers' Retirement System, once skeptical of the company's growth strategy, publicly thanked her for safeguarding shareholder assets. Several angel investors and advisors from Boston, Chicago, and Austin reached out, offering to join the board's restructuring efforts on one condition: Linda had to stay at the helm. Even former employees who had quietly left under Jason's leadership began returning. A veteran engineer, once labeled difficult to work with for questioning product strategy, sent Linda a handwritten note. "Not everyone has the guts to come back and fight after being humiliated. But you did, and because of that, we dared to come back too." Even the younger generation at the company, those who once doubted her for being outdated, had begun to see Linda in a new light. In one team meeting, a 27-year-old software engineer said candidly, "I used to think that if you didn't understand tech, you couldn't lead. But I was wrong. You taught me that real leadership is about enabling others to grow, not knowing everything yourself." Linda's family felt the shift too. Her daughter, a practicing attorney in San Francisco, flew back to New York to attend the next shareholder meeting. After the meeting ended, she embraced her mother. "You've taught me so much about law. But this time, you taught me something more important. Never let anyone else define your worth." Linda didn't respond right away. She just smiled and looked back at the headquarters, where she now stood not only as a leader, but as a living symbol of endurance and the deep wisdom of those once overlooked. The news hit like a punch to the gut. Without that loan, the company wouldn't be able to make payroll next quarter. Several key projects would have to pause. Linda understood. This was no longer a battle for reputation. This was financial life or death. What made her more suspicious was the fact that the bank representative used to be one of Jason's close friends in the investment world. This might not be a coincidence. Linda threw herself into long days of meetings, combing through every expense, every budget line. She and her team drafted a detailed financial recovery plan, including an emergency spending chart, cash flow models, and a practical 18-month growth strategy. She staked her entire reputation and her decades of accounting expertise on that plan. But then another blow came. A core group of senior developers submitted their resignations. They were blunt. "We don't believe this company will last another year." Linda nearly broke. She had done everything right, restored financial transparency, restructured the product roadmap, rebuilt company culture. But the chaos Jason left behind still loomed like a shadow, haunting everyone. One night, alone in her office, Linda glanced at the calendar on the wall. It had been almost exactly a year since the day she was called uninformed and had her salary slashed. Who would have thought the wheel of fate would turn like this? A 56-year-old woman trying to keep an entire company from collapsing with nothing but her bare hands. She opened her laptop and typed a note. "If I fail, I'll fail for trying with honesty, not for giving in to fear." She made a decision. The next morning, she would meet the bank's executive board on her own. No PR consultant. No emergency emails. She would sit in front of them as someone who had once saved this company from the ashes and make her case for why it was still worth believing in. That morning, Linda wore a classic gray suit. No jewelry. No elaborate makeup. She wanted them to see her as she was not a negotiator, but a woman who had once been dismissed, yet still rose for the company she helped build from the beginning. At the high-rise bank office on Park Avenue, New York, she was ushered into a private conference room. 4 men sat across from her, 3 of whom had previously worked with Jason. No warm greetings. Just cold stares and the opening line. "We don't see clear evidence of liquidity for the next 3 quarters." Linda began her presentation. She walked them through the financial restructuring strategy, the steadily rising net profits, new purchase orders from the Midwest, and the return of partners due to renewed transparency. But when she got to the 12th slide, one of them interrupted. "We don't need the numbers. We need a younger CEO, someone competitive in a digital-first market." That sentence cut through Linda's composure like a knife. All the effort, all the sleepless nights boiled down to a single bias: age. Not performance. Not results. Just younger. That evening, Linda sat alone on a bench in Bryant Park, just blocks from the bank. The air was chilly. Fallen leaves scattered the cobblestones. She watched the people passing by, young professionals in suits, elderly couples hand in hand, homeless folks curled in corners. She asked herself, what am I even doing? Holding on to a company that once cast me aside? Am I really strong or just pretending to be? For a moment, she considered writing a resignation letter. She imagined what it would feel like to walk away from it all, to live quietly in rural Connecticut, tending a garden, reading every morning. But then her phone buzzed. A message from the HR manager. "Linda, the whole team is still at the office. They're not going home until you come back. I just want you to know, we believe in you." Linda gripped the phone tightly. She looked up at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly above the skyscrapers, but they moved. Just like her. Even if slowly. Even if imperfectly. She stood up, walked forward, and whispered to herself. "I didn't come here to be accepted. I came to prove that value has no expiration date." 2 days after that tense bank meeting, Linda arrived at the office at 6 a.m. The sky was still dark, but her mind was clear. She had a plan not to defend anymore, but to strike back. She knew it was pointless to keep trying to convince people who had no interest in listening. The issue wasn't data or liquidity. It was power and perception. And if the game was about perception, then Linda decided she'd rewrite the entire narrative. She called an emergency meeting with the marketing team, the legal department, and a media consultant who had once worked at the Wall Street Journal. She opened with a single sentence. "I've let others control this company's story for too long. Now we tell it ourselves with the truth." Linda's plan had 3 parts. 1. Full public transparency of the company's financials and recovery journey. She released a new annual report, clear, accessible, and structured like a story, from the peak of the crisis to each step of restructuring, every contract renewed, every debt paid off. It wasn't just a dry financial report, it was a story of rebirth. 2. A deliberate internal and external media campaign. Linda agreed to an interview with Forbes Women, sharing her personal journey, from a CFO demoted and pushed aside, to the woman who brought the company back from the brink. She didn't badmouth Jason, she simply told the truth, calmly and confidently. 3. A live, open shareholder meeting in Chicago. All investors, large and small, were invited. No closed-door session, but a public, live-streamed event. Linda wanted everyone, including the media, to see this. The company had nothing to hide. And she had nothing to fear. Within 2 weeks, everything began to shift. The annual report was widely shared on LinkedIn and Twitter. Her interview made the front page of Forbes' Notable Financial Leaders section. Those who had once remained silent on the board were now voicing their support. A major investor from Texas emailed, "Thank you for not giving up. I trust Linda more than anyone who's ever run this company." From a position of doubt, Linda was now redefining herself, not just as a bookkeeper, but as a rebuilder. And behind the scenes, she was preparing her decisive move. She arranged to buy out Jason's shares through an intermediary investment fund, officially ending his influence on the board. That day, Linda walked into the shareholder meeting hall in Chicago, where everyone was gathered in anticipation of a pivotal decision. The room buzzed with light and murmured conversations. Every shareholder, every investor had their own stake, but all understood one thing: this was no longer just one person's battle. This was about the company's survival and Linda's leadership. Jason, invited by a few loyal shareholders, was also present. His eyes gleamed with confidence, as if he were certain of victory. After all that had transpired, no one doubted he would try to reclaim control. Linda stepped up to the podium, looked directly at the shareholders, and spoke with calm resolve. There were no flashy figures, no grand speech, just the honest story of the company, one of grit, endurance, and the relentless fight through its darkest days. She said, "Everyone has the right to question whether this company can go on. But I speak not just as a leader, but as someone who has witnessed every step of this journey. We've weathered our worst crises, and we'll face many more. But what I need you to believe in is this: I don't just manage finances. I manage trust. And that's the most important thing a leader can offer." When Linda finished, the room fell into tense silence. Jason stood up, his expression tight with frustration, and approached the podium. He couldn't stomach how steady and persuasive Linda's case had been. In a cold, cutting tone, he declared, "Linda, I respect your efforts, but this company can't grow without continuous innovation. What you're doing is resisting change. If I were still in charge, I'd return this company to a strategy of true creativity and competition." The room was dead silent until a shareholder rose and interrupted. "This company doesn't need more risky strategies. We need someone with vision who can sustain long-term stability and growth." "I stand with Linda." Applause broke out from a large group of shareholders. Linda turned to look at Jason, now standing silently. In that moment, he realized shareholder support was no longer his. Linda didn't have to say another word. She had won. Not with numbers or flashy strategies, but with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering loyalty to the company she had protected. A week later, the board officially announced that Jason was no longer part of the company. His shares had been quietly acquired through the investment fund Linda had set up months earlier. After the historic Chicago meeting, where Linda secured not just a strategic, but a symbolic victory, the company entered a new era. Change didn't just come from new leadership. It came from an entirely new mindset about how the company should operate. Linda launched a full-scale reform centered on 3 key goals. 1. Rebuilding company culture. Linda understood that the biggest shift wasn't about numbers. It was about how people approached their work, how they treated one another, and how they interacted with customers. She began by organizing open forums and cross-department conversations where employees could share ideas and concerns. One of her most important moves was implementing an open leadership policy, making leadership more accessible and inclusive of employee input. 2. Embracing technological innovation and workflow transformation. Working with top tech advisors, Linda fast-tracked digital transformation. The company adopted data analytics tools and automated workflows to boost efficiency. Outdated systems were scrapped and replaced with modern software, optimizing both production and finance operations. Linda wasn't just pushing for tech innovation, she was proving that people her age could lead boldly in a digital world. 3. Personalized customer care. One of the company's greatest strengths, which Linda deeply valued, was its long-term client relationships. She shifted customer service strategy away from impersonal surveys and generic reports. Instead, teams were retrained to truly listen and respond to individual client needs. The new approach emphasized creative problem-solving, speed, and meaningful connection. Early results. Within just a few months, Linda's changes began paying off. Revenue increased by 15% year-over-year, driven by improvements in both production and customer service. The company's stock began to grow steadily, and most importantly, the team's confidence was restored. Linda felt the shift within herself, too. She wasn't just the woman who had taken down Jason, she was now the true leader of the company. Her leadership was proven not through promises, but through action. One day, standing by the window in her office, gazing out at New York's skyline, she remembered something an old friend once told her. "We never truly know how strong we are until we're standing at the edge of failure." She smiled, not because she had won, but because she had proven that even when pushed to the margins, one can rise and take control of the game. Everything had unfolded just as Linda had hoped. After a year filled with challenges and transformation, the company not only recovered, it flourished. The changes she implemented didn't just revitalize the company's public image, they restored the trust of shareholders, employees, and customers alike. Linda had laid a solid foundation for sustainable growth in the years to come. One quiet fall weekend, Linda sat in her office, looking out the window. The soft afternoon light filtered through golden leaves drifting gently to the ground. She reflected on the journey she had taken from being dismissed and underestimated to becoming the resilient leader of a thriving company. She had learned a lot. First, the lesson of patience. Throughout the company's rebuilding process, there were countless moments when Linda felt tempted to give up, especially when faced with financial setbacks and opposition from those who didn't believe in her. But she stayed the course, not just to prove a point, but to protect what she had built. The second lesson was the power of confidence and truth. Linda never resorted to underhanded tactics to achieve her goals. She believed that with persistence and honesty, she could overcome any obstacle. When Jason tried to undermine her, Linda didn't respond with anger. She stood firm, calm, and fought back with integrity. And finally, she learned that success never comes easy. Every victory is earned with sweat and tears. Every step forward is the result of long, tireless effort. Her greatest accomplishment wasn't just the company's recovery and growth, it was the shift in how she saw herself. She was no longer someone to be sidelined or manipulated. She was a leader, one who could truly make a difference. Months later, as she looked back on the entire journey, Linda knew she had learned one of life's most valuable lessons. You may not be able to control what happens to you, but you always have the power to control how you respond and how you rise again. With the company transformed, Linda made sure to pass on the lessons she'd learned. She began hosting seminars on leadership and crisis management, sharing her story as a case study in perseverance, strategic thinking, and overcoming adversity. In doing so, she realized she wasn't just helping her company, she was helping others navigate their own challenges. In Linda's heart, even after the victory, the thing she valued most wasn't money or recognition, it was the peace and confidence she had found within herself. The end of the story wasn't the end of a battle, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter she was ready to face, knowing she had already won once and could win again.